Number 10. Stuck in a chimney. Firefighters were recently called to a scene because a man got stuck inside his own chimney. This happened in Tucson, Arizona, home of the smallest people in the US, and no, the man was not robbing his own house. What actually happened was that he locked his keys inside his home and he was just trying to get back in. Rather than break a window, jimmy a lock, or simply call a locksmith, the guy thought it would be a brilliant idea to wriggle down the chimney. And of course, that's kind of the dumbest idea ever, and he immediately got stuck. And then he remained inside the chimney covered in dirt and soot, screaming for 4 hours, before a neighbor finally heard him and called the fire department. The incident was reported by ABC7 News, and the man did not appear to suffer any serious injuries. If anything, the guy was probably just embarrassed and extremely itchy from being stuck inside a chimney. Maybe next time he'll just break a window, or, get a copy of his key made. Number 9. Stuck to a toilet. Every young boy hears threats from his mother about falling into the toilet if he doesn't leave the seat down. It's a trick used to get young boys into the habit of leaving the seat down for the ladies in the house. And while nobody thinks that you could actually get stuck in a toilet, that's exactly what happened to one unfortunate woman. But the exact details of this case are about to blow your mind. According to the report from CBS News, a woman spent almost 2 years inside a bathroom, stuck on the toilet seat. If that's not disturbing enough already, the woman's boyfriend has been charged with mistreatment of a dependent adult. Apparently, the woman, who was 35 years old at the time of the story, had been in fear of leaving the bathroom, likely for psychological reasons. The boyfriend had brought her food and water every day and had allegedly asked her to come out, but she only ever replied, "Well, maybe tomorrow." The woman had been sitting on the toilet for so long that sores had developed, which caused her to become stuck to the seat. The sheriff who found her in such a terrible condition actually had to use a pry bar to get the seat off the toilet. She was then taken to the hospital with the seat still attached to her bottom. Number 8. Stuck in a washing machine. A teenage girl from Virginia recently had the experience of a lifetime after making an extremely poor decision during a family game of hide and seek. And that's not usually a game that ends with the fire department coming in to rescue somebody. Most people will just hide under a bed, maybe in a closet. But this teenage girl decided the best hiding place was inside the washing machine. She climbed into the appliance and immediately got stuck. The Prince William County Department of Fire and Rescue arrived at the home, where they then needed to remove the top of the washing machine to make enough space for the girl to get out without being injured. At the end of the day, everything was fine. But this is kind of a humiliating story the young girl will need to live with for the rest of her life. At least it's a good icebreaker on a first date, I guess. Have you ever gotten stuck in any of these places? What's the strangest place you've ever been stuck? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We got lots more fun videos coming up. Number 7. Stuck in a cement hopper. In 2018, Alameda County firefighters were called in to rescue a man who managed to get himself stuck inside of a cement hopper. If you're not sure what a cement hopper is, it's the giant spinning bucket on the back of a cement truck that's used to mix cement. The guy who got stuck was apparently a supervisor who'd been looking into the silo when he lost his balance and tumbled inside. And this may seem hilarious, but it's actually extremely dangerous. A cement hopper is filled with all kinds of nasty chemicals. Plus, the guy got stuck up to his waist in dry cement. That's probably the last thing you want to get stuck in, seeing as when that stuff dries, it's not going to be easy to get out of. Lucky, the Alameda County fire rescuers managed to secure the worker using a harness. They provided him with oxygen during the miserable ordeal, and then they drained the cement from the bottom of the hopper. In the end, the man was able to be hoisted out of the vehicle and then taken away in an ambulance. Number 6. Stuck in a traffic cone. A prankster somehow got himself stuck inside of a traffic cone. Not one of the pointy orange traffic cones, but one of the square ones that you see in pedestrian traffic zones. This happened in the United Kingdom, and the guy got so effectively stuck that the police were called to get the man out. He was trying to cheer up shoppers in a busy pedestrian area, according to the New York Daily News, by walking around with the traffic cone on his head. However, the plastic cone, shaped more like a rectangle, slipped down his torso and trapped his arms to his sides, leaving him completely helpless. Luckily, cell phone footage caught the entire incident, and it's kinda hilarious. Police and citizens helped to pull the guy out of the traffic cone by his legs, and in the end, everything turned out just fine. Number 5. Stuck in a claw machine. This next one is something that you really only ever see in movies and on TV. And how it ever happened is completely boggling, but it did really happen. In Florida, a young boy was so eager to win a prize from an arcade claw machine that he actually somehow climbed inside of it. He apparently reached in to grab a stuffed animal, and in the process ended up literally stuck inside the machine, sitting on a giant pile of plush toys. While this should have been a dream come true, the child was instead horrified. The incident went down while the boy was eating dinner with his family, and before anybody knew what was going on, the family looked over to see the kid crying and pounding on the glass. He had hoisted himself all the way inside the machine in just seconds. Luckily, the Tutsville Fire and Emergency Services showed up quickly and helped to extract the boy from the machine. And no, they didn't put in some quarters and catch him using the claw mechanism. They simply opened the machine and let the boy out. And he even got away with the toy he was after in the first place. Lucky dude. Number 4. Stuck under some ice. Getting stuck under the ice of a frozen lake must be the most harrowing experience one can go through. And it just goes to show the level of stupidity that some TikTok influencers will go through just to get a bit of attention. It all happened when a guy named Jason Clark, who at the time had just over 400,000 followers, tried to swim under the ice of a frozen lake. He entered the ice through one small hole with the intention of coming back out through the same hole. Unfortunately, things can get a little dizzying under the water. He couldn't find the hole to get out. Jason was effectively trapped beneath the ice, while a woman filmed the whole incident for social media. Apparently, once Jason got under the ice, he just couldn't see anything. He then tried to break the ice with his back to get out, but it just wouldn't work. He became short of breath, he couldn't see anything, and he really thought he was going to be dead in seconds. By some fluke or maybe a miracle, at the very last moment he found the hole and burst out of the ice. In the video, you can hear him screaming that he almost died, and the woman filming had literally no idea that Jason was seconds away from never breathing again. Number 3. Stuck in an ATM. Probably a lot of people out there right now who would love to get stuck inside of an automatic teller machine, also known as an ATM. This is exactly what happened to a repairman back in 2017. The story was reported by CNN, and it's absolutely hilarious. The guy was changing the lock behind the machine that connects the ATM to the bank. And while that was happening, he somehow got trapped inside the ATM unit itself. Normally, the repairman could have texted or phoned somebody to help get him out. He had no phone, there was no one around to help him, and so he had to resort to scribbling for help on a piece of paper and then slipping that paper through the receipt slot. His hope was that a customer would see the note and then come help him. The guy wrote on the note, "Please help, I'm stuck in here. I don't have my phone. Please call my boss." And at the end of the note was the phone number for his boss. Thankfully for this guy, a customer of the bank found the note, and even though they first assumed it was a joke, they decided to call the number anyway. And while they were phoning the number, they could hear a small voice coming from within the machine. In the end, police showed up and kicked the door down to get the repairman out. Number 2. Stuck in a swing. There's a reason that children's swings are designed the way they are. And I'm talking about the swings for very small children. The ones that have the metal bar which slides down the chain to lock them in. It's not meant for adults, it's also not meant for teenage girls. And one teenager found this out the hard way after she got stuck inside of the child's swing at a Tots playground after her friends dared her to sit in it. At first, sure, it was really funny, but the fun quickly ran out when the teenager realized she could not get out of the baby swing on her own. It ended up that fire crews needed to be called to the park at around 10 o'clock that night, and they were then forced to use a bolt cutter to get the teen out of the swing. Other than a bit of bruising, she ended up being just fine at the end of the night. Number 1. Stuck in prison. It's one thing to be stuck in prison. It's another thing altogether to get stuck in the wall of a prison while you're trying to break out of the prison you were already stuck in. When 4 inmates tried to escape through a hole they made in their cell wall using a metal pipe, the second prisoner got stuck, keeping the other 2 guys trapped inside the prison while the first guy ran away. He was obviously caught in the act by police and stuffed right back into jail. This went down at a Ceres prison in the west of Brazil, and apparently the prisoner was badly injured during his time stuck inside the wall. He actually began to scream and cry for help, which isn't really ideal in the middle of a breakout. Guards arrived and discovered the weird scene, but before they did anything to help, they were sure to take some hilarious photos of the guy to post online. As for the guy who got out before the second escapee got stuck, he actually escaped successfully. He even managed to get over the perimeter wall and an electrified fence. I guess it's just too bad for the other 3 guys. Number 10. Snake-eating fish. Let's talk about the fish that has been caught eating a snake. Many of you may have seen this viral video online, showing what looks like some kind of big-mouthed trout slurping up a giant eel or snake, or at least trying to. By absolutely no account should this terrifying thing exist. Fish are not supposed to eat snakes, that's just not the way it goes. And while there is not much information anywhere online about what species of fish is witnessed in this video, it's safe to say that it's a freak of nature. What's even stranger is that this fish couldn't even eat the entire eel. It managed to swallow most of it into its fat fish guts, but it was simply too big. The eel then managed to escape in the water and get away, and the fish went back about its business. But the fact that this fish could suck up an eel so effortlessly is kinda ridiculous. In fact, the last thing you want when you're sitting at the beach is a fish that can suck up your toes. Talk about horrifying. Number 9. Legless amphibian. Speaking of eels, let's check out a new legless amphibian discovered in the Cardamom Mountains of Cambodia. As a rule of thumb, there should be just 2 types of amphibians. There can be the kind with legs, and then there can be snakes. But this new species is a total abnormality. It's a kind of limbless amphibian that isn't a snake, known as a Sicilian. Larger species can grow to be around 4 to 5 feet in length, and they live specifically in Southeast Asia, mostly in Cambodia and Vietnam. You'll probably never run into one of these weird animals. They look almost like earthworms, but they're way, way bigger. They also have a skull and bones, which worms certainly do not. They also aren't dangerous, even though people often mistake them as snakes. They survive solely on a diet of termites, ants, and other small invertebrates like earthworms. Number 8. Tube-nosed fruit bat. Here is another animal that seems like it really shouldn't exist. There are enough bats out there without the bizarre tube-nosed fruit bat flying around freaking people out. While fruit bats are already kind of weird, this one takes it to a new level. This is mainly because of its weird face. The bat has yellowish-brown wings, deadly eyes, and a nose that looks like a pair of tubes. Its nose is Y-shaped with tubular nostrils that measure up to 6 millimeters in length and are angled at more than 90 degrees. The result is something that looks absolutely absurd. While all bats are indisputably gross, this one is definitely the ugliest. It lives mostly in the forests and swamps of Southeast Asia, and it eats mostly figs and other small fruit. It also sometimes accidentally eats insects that are already sitting on the fruit. Usually these bats pick up their favorite fruits or figs after dark, then carry them off to a preferred feeding roost away from other bats. During the day, they hide in the foliage. The only good thing about the tube-nosed fruit bat is that you'll probably never encounter one. Number 7. Satanic leaf-tailed gecko. I'm not sure who named the satanic leaf-tailed gecko, but it does seem like a strange choice. The gecko definitely looks like a leaf, and it even has a tail that looks exactly like a fallen leaf from a tree, with the same grooves and everything. But in no way does it seem satanic. In fact, I'm sure they could have just dropped the first part and have left it as the leaf-tailed gecko. Would have been a nicer name, but in any case, this is definitely the weirdest gecko on the planet. It really does look just like a leaf. How this thing managed to evolve with the exact color pattern of fallen leaves is an undeniable miracle. And there isn't just one type of satanic leaf-tailed gecko. There are several different species, and each one has a different color and a different texture of skin depending on the kind of foliage they live in. Some are red, some are brown, and some are the dead color of fallen leaves. Even stranger is that they have massive eyes with no eyelids. Rather than eyelids, the gecko will lick its eyeballs to keep them clean. Like most geckos, these ones live in the trees. They have toes made up of millions of tiny little plates that help them stick to stuff, and they have curved claws for additional grip. They hunt at night, eating mostly insects and small rodents. Basically, this gecko will eat anything it can manage to overpower. And just like most of the animals we'll talk about today, you'll probably never see a satanic leaf-tailed gecko in the wild because they literally do look like leaves. If you thought chameleons were the masters of camouflage, well then you hadn't met the leaf-tailed gecko. Number 6. Desert rain frog. One might argue that the desert rain frog looks like a puffer fish that grew legs and crawled up onto the land. This tiny little animal is only 2.5 inches long and looks like a dog's chew toy, but their physical weirdness is only the beginning of the story. When a wildlife photographer traveled to South Africa, he was not expecting to stumble upon this bizarre frog and make the discovery of a lifetime. He was one of the first to capture the horrifying noise made by this small and oddly round frog. He managed to get a video of this thing, and it basically broke the internet in 2013 with over 17 million views. The desert rain frog doesn't croak or ribbit like you might think. Instead, it squeaks with a sound like a chew toy. It lets out a long and piercing squeak that has since earned it the title as the cutest frog in the world. The desert rain frog is not poisonous, it's not aggressive, and it's not really that big either. The only ability it has is an absolutely insane squeaking noise that it makes to ward off predators and tell nosy photographers to go away. They also spend most of their time buried in the sand to stay hydrated, so don't really bet on seeing one on your next trip to Namibia. Number 5. The shoebill. Almost every list of animals that shouldn't exist includes the shoebill, and for good reason. This is the scariest, ugliest, and most horrifying bird on the planet, and for way more reasons than one. First, the bird is taller than a mailbox. It can stand nearly 5 feet with a wingspan of about 8 feet. This massive bird would definitely give you a heart attack if you saw one standing at the edge of your driveway. Honestly, there are almost too many weird facts to talk about when it comes to the shoebill. The main thing is its gigantic bill. Some people have compared its bill to a traditional Dutch wooden shoe, and yeah, they do kinda look similar. According to the San Diego Zoo, the shoebill uses its giant face as a container for fish, as a bucket to soak its eggs with, and as a musical instrument. The shoebill will clap its bill to make horrible noises that scare away predators and attract females. But once a shoebill finds a mate, don't expect these ugly birds to be very affectionate. Even when they are paired with another bird, they feed at opposite ends of their territory, which is the bird equivalent to sleeping in separate bedrooms when you're married. Number 4. Sea pig. The sea pig doesn't really look like a pig at all. It kind of looks like, well, there isn't really much to compare it to. Maybe a cross between a sea cucumber and a pig? They're honestly just really strange. Sea pigs are either horrifying or adorable, depending on who you're talking to. They have elongated tubes for legs, with what appears to be translucent tentacles sticking out of their face. They also seem to have 4 antennae sticking up from their body. And while it's probably their posture that reminds people of land pigs, sea pigs are actually sea cucumbers. According to Ocean Conservancy, the sea pig is a special type of sea cucumber closely related to starfish and sea urchins. They grow to be about 6 inches long and closely resemble a bloated sausage filled with water. And also, here's a fun fact, they breathe out of their butts. The good news is that you will never have to meet one of these bizarre sea pigs because they live from anywhere between 4,000 and 16,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. This has actually made them very difficult to study. Most scientists believe that sea pigs use their various face tentacles to search for food while they wander across the ocean floor. Also, they don't have many predators because their skin is laced with poison. That's handy. Number 3. The blue dragon. The blue dragon has been referred to as a real-life Pokemon. And even though it kinda looks like a small blue and purple dragon floating across the bottom of the ocean, it's actually a slug. And by no means should any slug on Earth look the way this one does. It's absolutely ridiculous. And while it may appear large in the photos, the blue dragon only grows to be about an inch long. They hang out at the bottom of the ocean feeding on leftovers just like any slug you would put in your fish tank. However, when they're feeling brave, these slugs will float upside down in warm ocean currents and feast on small venomous jellyfish by grabbing them with their blue feet. But what's really terrifying about the blue dragon is that after one has fed on a venomous jellyfish, they can unleash all of that venom by stinging somebody. So if you happen to be splashing around on the beach at the same time one of these slugs is floating by with a bunch of venom stored in its body, it really could sting you just like a jellyfish. Number 2. Blue-footed bobby. The blue-footed bobby is probably the coolest bird you've never seen. It has the bluest feet of any animal ever. In fact, there is no mistaking the blue-footed bobby for any other bird. They live in the Galapagos Islands, and their brightly colored feet have made them one of the most intriguing natural attractions in the area. There are 3 different species of them found in the Galapagos. They're large, with ordinary bodies of white and black hair, but it's their giant blue feet that really make them stand out. According to Galapagos Conservation, females will choose a male partner based on the brightness of their feet. That means that the bird with the bluest feet will have the best chances of mating. Imagine if you could put on some really bright sneakers and snag a girlfriend in 5 minutes flat. That'd make for a really interesting dating app profile picture, but that's what life is like for the blue-footed bobby. Number 1. The white rhino. If you think about it, the rhinoceros is basically a fat unicorn with 2 short horns. Honestly, a rhino is really just a shorter and heavier horse with gray skin and 2 horns. It's basically a mutant unicorn. And while the fact that rhinos exist has always been fascinating, they don't really exist any longer. Specifically, the white rhinoceros has reached the end of its long and strange life on our planet. The very last male white rhinoceros died in 2018, and even though there are still 2 females left, the big issue is that obviously 2 females can't mate and create babies. They aren't snails. But according to CNN, scientists are trying very hard to save the white rhino by artificially fertilizing in vitro embryos from the last 2 lady rhinos. But even if this works and 1 white rhino is born, there's still a pretty good chance that the white rhino will never make a recovery. After all, these beautiful creatures have always been too amazing to have existed in the first place. Number 10. The Fiji mermaid. The Fiji mermaid has been baffling people for centuries. This horrific monster has a face that looks like an old man's, as well as distorted fingers, tiny little teeth, and a weird body. Truly, it is the stuff of nautical nightmares. It's apparently been around since 1842, when it was a strange freak show being exhibited at circuses all across the country. To this day, the same frightening creature can be found all over the internet, grinning at you from different angles. But this freak show has a very rich history. It was allegedly caught in the South Pacific, near the Fiji Islands, and many replicas of it have been made to this day. But if you want to know what the Fiji mermaid really is, well, prepare to be grossed out. The disgusting mermaid thing that you see all over the net is actually a monkey body sewn onto a fish's tail, and it was first crafted by a fisherman as an interesting display piece. The disgusting hybrid creature was eventually sold though, and then dragged around the United States and showed to people as a factual oddity, when of course no such beast has ever really existed. Unfortunately, the original Fiji mermaid disappeared sometime in the 1800s when the museum it was living in burned down, but to this day you can still find many great replicas of this horrendous beast. And no end of conspiracy theories surrounding it either. Number 9. Vampire grave. Here is an even weirder story than the mermaid. In the Lafayette Cemetery, buried in the poorest section of the graveyard, there is entombed a possible vampire. The vampire's name was Theodore Glava, and he was a Transylvanian immigrant who went to America to seek a better life. However, he likely died after a pretty bleak life as a coal miner in the middle of the 1918 flu epidemic. He was buried in the Lafayette Cemetery in Colorado. But it wasn't until many years after his death that Theodore Glava became famous. Everybody knows that Transylvania, which is actually just a region inside of Romania, is synonymous with vampires. And apparently it was synonymous with vampires back in the early 1900s as well. The settlers were untrusting enough without a tall and very pale man from the land of vampires showing up in their town. According to local legends, the townspeople actually dug up this guy's grave and found that he had blood around his mouth and abnormally large teeth and fingernails. Then the settlers stabbed him in the heart with a stake and reburied him. While this definitely seems like something a group of paranoid settlers could have done, it might actually be true. A tree has been discovered, growing straight through the grave plot where Theodore is buried. Rumors say that the tree grew out of the wooden stake that had been stabbed through his chest. So what's the most bizarre thing you've ever found in your travels? Some abandoned gas station, or perhaps an animal skull somewhere it shouldn't have been? Or something maybe even more spooky and shocking? Let me know what you found in the comments section below. And then be sure to subscribe to World List for more amazing videos just like this one. Number 8. Alien remains. A mermaid, a vampire, and now an alien. Deep in the wilds of Peru, researchers have discovered what's being referred to as proof of extraterrestrial life. The body of something almost human, but not quite, has been discovered with a skull shaped like a triangle, nearly 20 inches tall. The skull is almost the size of the being's actual body. There hasn't been a lot of information revealed about where the skull was found or how, but we can be sure that the images are likely real. Some professionals are saying that the remains likely belong to a child that was born with an unusually shaped head, or others are saying that it's actually the body of an alien. It could have been one of the aliens that helped the ancient South American people to build such incredible monuments. Then again, it could have just been a child that had its skull squished between some wooden slats to give it a longer skull. Unfortunately, there have not been enough scientific investigations into this skull yet to determine the truth, but just looking at its oversized eye sockets makes you think it's an alien. Even if it had been a child with an elongated skull, there's no accounting for the huge eye sockets. As of right now, this might be the closest thing we have on the planet to physical evidence of alien beings. Number 7. The tunnels of Baiae. The city of Baiae was one of the most hedonistic places in ancient Rome. It was a seaside resort visited by the wealthiest people in the empire, including many of Rome's ancient rulers like Caesar and Nero. It was apparently the most debaucherous place in all of Europe, at least until volcanic activity resulted in the ancient resort being swallowed by the sea. It's now located completely underground, and the only way to visit it is by strapping on some diving equipment and getting wet. But there is an even greater mystery here. In 1932, a previously unknown chamber was discovered by an Italian archaeologist near the flooded city. Then, in the 1960s, the chamber was fully explored. It turned out to be a complex system of underground tunnels. Apparently, these mysterious tunnels had once been constructed to mimic the mythical Greek underworld, as if traveling into Hades. Within the underground system of tunnels is a sulfurous stream which would have represented the river Styx. The archaeologist that discovered and explored the tunnel believes that the Romans probably used the tunnel system for some kind of ritual purpose, likely ferrying people across the sulfurous stream and even deeper into the tunnel complex to a hidden sanctuary where a mysterious ritual probably took place. However, because of the awful shape of the tunnels and all the erosion and devastation that has taken place over time, it's proved impossible to fully excavate the site. Number 6. Weird mummies. One of the strangest and by far the most gruesome discoveries involves the work of a man named Girolamo Sagato, also known as the Petrifier. This guy was a cartographer, Egyptologist, and a naturalist. In the year 1818, he went on an expedition to Egypt where he learned of mummification. After returning to Italy, he became obsessed with the technique for preserving human remains. But he wanted to do an even better job than the Egyptians had. He ended up creating a way to make dead people look fresh. He was so successful that people began to whisper that he had learned Egyptian black magic and was practicing it on his subjects. This caused him to be ostracized and ridiculed and basically kicked out of the scientific community. But what's really strange is that Girolamo never mummified a full body. He only ever practiced using hands, feet, brains, heads, small animals, and even fetuses. But whatever he practiced on, he did manage to preserve incredibly well, turning any human body part into a perfect fossil. The few of his relics still remaining can be found at the Museum of the Department of Anatomy in Florence. But as for the unique technique of how he petrified organs and human body parts, well, that's all been lost. Girolamo became paranoid. He ended up burning all of his notes on how to turn dead bodies into stone, and then he died shortly after. Number 5. Shackled skeletons. A recent archaeological discovery in Greece has revealed 36 skeletons still in their shackles that could have been slaughtered rebels from a failed coup in Athens in the year 632 BC. The discovery was found in the ancient port city of Phaleron, roughly 4 miles from Athens. Inside the mass grave were 80 skeletons, all of them lined next to each other and 36 of them still bound in iron chains. Researchers are thinking that these slaughtered people likely followed someone named Cylon, an old tyrant who tried to take over Athens and failed miserably. By investigating the teeth of the skeletons, researchers were able to identify them as young people in good health. This helps with the theory that they were political rebels intent on governmental change. According to Smithsonian Magazine, this was a time in which Athens was in turmoil because of poor harvests and serious social inequality. The coup began in 1632, but most of the city wasn't that interested. The rebels were forced to run away and take shelter, but they were eventually captured and slaughtered. And while there's no direct evidence that these recently discovered skeletons were part of the coup, archaeologists believe it's the most logical explanation. Number 4. Frankenstein bog bodies. Nothing is quite as freaky as the Frankenstein bog bodies. In 2001, 4 skeletons were discovered on an island in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. These skeletons appeared to have come from the Bronze Age, and at first it seemed like a pretty normal burial. However, after some tests were done, researchers realized something was seriously wrong. First, the people buried didn't die at the same time. Tests showed that they died roughly 300 years apart. Further studies showed that the bodies were not even buried after their death. For example, one skeleton showed that it hadn't been buried until about 600 years after its original time of death. This is highly unusual because why would you leave a body sitting there to rot and not bury it for hundreds of years? It then turned out that the bodies had likely been preserved intentionally inside of a peat bog, then later retrieved and buried. Further tests revealed something even stranger. It turned out that the bodies were built from pieces of many different people, just like Frankenstein's monster. One skeleton proved to be constructed of 6 different individuals. This has led experts to believe that the bodies were retrieved from the bog and then stitched together like a jigsaw puzzle. However, nobody has any idea why this happened. To this day, it's a major mystery that no one can solve. It was either some kind of psychotic lunatic or some kind of forgotten ritual. Number 3. The mysterious Andrewsarchus beast. The Andrewsarchus is one of the biggest mysteries in the world of paleontology. In 1923, a group of researchers went on an expedition into Inner Mongolia. They were in a place called the Valley of the Jewels when they made an extraordinary discovery. They found a superb skull that had belonged to a giant beast. The expedition leader described the skull as being roughly 3 feet long with huge teeth. One of the paleontologists on the team declared that the skull belonged to a group of extinct pigs, but another said the skull probably belonged to an unknown carnivore. The skull was named after the leader of the expedition, and it was taken back to civilization and studied. The Andrewsarchus skull found in Mongolia is now the only specimen of its kind ever uncovered. This is incredible because the creature probably lived as recently as 45 million years ago. So that means there should be way more specimens close to the surface of the Earth. This is made even more incredible by the fact that the skull belonged to a ferocious beast that stood roughly 6 feet high at its shoulders and was 12 feet long. This would make it the largest carnivorous land mammal that ever existed. So that's got me thinking, what else is out there? Number 2. Ancient stone circles. For whatever reason, circles are endlessly mysterious. Whether we're talking about stone monoliths or crop circles, they're always baffling and bizarre. In the Middle East, researchers have discovered huge stone circles that they can't explain. Archaeologists in Jordan have captured high-resolution images from the air of 11 giant circles scattered across the country, measuring about 1,300 feet in diameter. All 11 of the circles have such a similar diameter that researchers don't believe it could be a coincidence. According to Live Science, archaeologists are calling the phenomenon the Big Circles. They were likely structures built with low stone walls and no openings. People would have to crawl over the walls just to get inside of these huge structures. The evidence suggested that these stone circles date back at least 2,000 years, but scientists say they could be even older. They could even date back to before writing was invented. And even though they were originally spotted in the 1920s, after all these years we still don't know the first thing about their purpose. Don't know who constructed the circles or what they were used for. Number 1. The mysterious Utah monolith. If you were paying attention to the news in 2020, which most of us were, you might remember the story of a hiker discovering a mysterious monolith in the Utah desert. So far as the story goes, the tall silver monolith was originally discovered by accident in the Red Rock Desert. Photos were uploaded online, and hikers and curious people immediately began flocking to the site to get a look at the strange monolith, which, by the way, looked a lot like the mysterious silver rectangle from the Stanley Kubrick film 2001: A Space Odyssey. However, the monolith was mysteriously removed. Before long, it had simply vanished. Nobody knew what happened until, according to ABC News, a group of friends shared their photos online. They apparently showed up in the middle of the night to try and see the monolith, only to come face to face with the mysterious people taking it down. 3 men dressed in black who didn't say a word quickly took down the monument and vanished into the darkness with it. But not before the group of friends snapped some photos. But even after all the attention, nobody knows who put the monolith there or who came and picked it up in the middle of the night. It's a total mystery. Number 10. SAWBLADE through the engine. A man in China is extremely lucky after a giant saw blade crashed through his car but didn't kill him. According to ABC News, this happened while the man was driving down the highway. He was on the expressway in central China when the blade from an enormous circular saw fell off the back of a truck that had been carrying heavy equipment in the lane right next to him. The saw fell off the truck and sliced through his hood. Miraculously, this guy walked away without a single scratch. He claims that he heard a bang and then he saw nothing but white smoke. But he did manage to get control of his car and pull over. While this guy is definitely one of the luckiest people ever, the police did say that if he'd been driving faster or if the blade had hit from just a slightly different angle, could have died on the spot. For example, if the blade had been sideways and smashed through his windshield instead of his hood, the result would have been something out of a bloody horror movie. As for the neglectful driver of the truck carrying heavy equipment, well, hopefully he got fired. Could you imagine? This looks like something straight out of a nightmare, but somehow the man survived, and he probably loves his life today. Number 9. The luckiest and unluckiest man alive. Frank Selleck has been labeled the luckiest and unluckiest man in the world. And you may have heard of him before. He apparently won the jackpot in 2002, and he also claims to have had 7 brushes with death throughout his life. However, there have been some serious doubts as to how true his stories are. First of all, he allegedly survived a plane crash in 1963 while flying from Zagreb to Rijeka. As if that wasn't unbelievable enough already, he also claims that he survived a train derailment the year before, and in 1966 he apparently survived a bus that crashed into a river. He also says that in 1970 and 1973, he survived 2 car accidents in which his car spontaneously caught fire. He even got hit by a bus in 1995. Then in 2002, he won the lottery. Obviously, this would be the most incredible story ever, if not for the fact that we have instant access to all the information we could ever want. After doing some digging, it turns out there was no Croatian plane crash in 1963, and there was no fatal train derailment the year before. While it is possible that these things happened but were never reported, it does seem seriously unlikely. Frank Selleck could have had some brushes with death in his lifetime, but as for him surviving a train crash, plane crash, and bus crash, well, the jury's still out. If I were the jury, though, I would pronounce this man a total fraudster and con artist. He sounds like maybe a bit of a habitual liar. Number 8. Tornado survivor. Tornadoes are a real force of nature. Most people don't get hit by a tornado and live to tell the tale. In fact, most people who get swept up in a vicious twister, well, they end up dead. But a guy named Matt Suter survived not only being swallowed by a tornado, but being thrown clear across a field. It all happened when Matt was pulled out of his house by a tornado in the middle of March, and then deposited a quarter of a mile away in a pasture. According to one tornado expert, this is the only person who has ever traveled so far inside of a twister and lived to tell about it. According to the young man himself, a senior at Fordland High School, it's a pretty awkward record to have. On the night of the tornado, Matt had been watching TV in his boxer shorts when he heard a sudden roar approaching the trailer where he lived with his grandmother. While trying to shut a window in the living room, the tornado sucked him outside. The distance he was thrown by the tornado was about 1,307 feet. He woke up in the field completely disoriented and could see the lights of his trailer shining in the distance. What's even more amazing about this story is that other than some badly bruised feet and a small cut on his head, he was absolutely fine. You might even say he's one of the luckiest people on Earth. What's the most vicious weather event or natural disaster you've ever experienced? Were you ever in a hurricane or near a tornado or an earthquake? Or if you're really unlucky, maybe a volcanic eruption? Or was it just a rough thunderstorm for you? Let me know your scariest experience with Mother Nature by writing a comment down below. Then be sure to subscribe to World List for more incredible videos just like this one. Number 7. Plane crash survivor. Surviving a plane crash is pretty much impossible. However, when Lamia Flight 2933 crashed in 2016, a man named Erwin Tumori survived. It was a literal miracle. 71 people died when the plane smashed into the Colombian mountains, but Erwin survived apparently by getting into the fetal position and putting luggage between his legs while everyone else got up and ran around the airplane screaming. He actually followed the guidelines that a person should follow in an emergency, trying to create as much cushioning around himself as possible and also protecting his head. He was one of 6 survivors, all of whom were extremely lucky. Another thing that made their escape possible was that the plane had very little fuel, so even when it crashed into the mountain and was ripped into 1,000 pieces, it didn't explode. 6 of the passengers managed to escape, and the other 71 sadly died on impact. Number 6. Undersea rescue. A Nigerian man survived the unthinkable. 2 full days submerged under the ocean, trapped inside a small air pocket. Harrison O'Keene was on a tugboat when it capsized during a heavy swell and sank to the seabed. But it sank upside down. Mr. Harrison somehow managed to get stuck inside of a very small air pocket, and he spent 2 full days at the bottom of the ocean with nothing to eat or drink, sitting in total darkness. The other 12 people on board, they all died, and Mr. Harrison was the only survivor. He sat inside the boat for 60 hours until a team of divers showed up and rescued him. Of course, they were extremely shocked to find someone alive inside of the wreckage, and they almost missed him. Mr. Harrison had to grab one of the divers as he passed by him, otherwise they would have just left him there completely unaware of his situation. After spending the rest of the day inside a decompression chamber to normalize his body pressure, Mr. Harrison was finally out of the ocean. This is honestly one of the most miraculous stories you'll probably ever hear, and it's likely Mr. Harrison will never get on another boat again. At least I'm sure I wouldn't if I were him. Number 5. 16 bullets. This next story is a true anomaly. Typically, if you get shot, you're gonna die. That's just the way it goes, and that's the way guns were designed. But one guy survived the impossible when he was shot 16 times and then proceeded to walk 2 miles to the hospital. Philadelphia police are still calling it a miracle. The police department spokesman told CNN that the man was shot 5 times on his right side, 2 times on his left hip, 3 times in his upper chest, once in his right shoulder, once in the right side of his neck, 3 times on his left forearm, and once in his right forearm. This guy was literally filled with lead, and even after being shot 16 times, he was still expected to survive. Police say they aren't sure why he was shot so many times, and they have no idea how he managed to walk himself to the hospital. They also don't have any idea how he could possibly still be alive, but nonetheless, he's gonna walk away no worse for wear, and with a truly remarkable story to tell. Number 4. Swallowed by a whale. How would you like to be swallowed by a whale? You probably wouldn't like it at all. I know I wouldn't. And neither did the South African diver who got swallowed by a whale and miraculously survived. It all happened when a bride's whale appeared out of nowhere and began to swallow everything in its path. According to the diver himself, he felt a sudden pressure around his waist and immediately understood he was being eaten. You can see the whole thing in a video uploaded to YouTube, which has since garnered millions of views. The whale literally swallowed this guy, and you can see the last second in which his head is just outside of the whale's mouth, and the rest of his body has been eaten. But even though this guy should have died, the whale seemed to realize its error. It opened its mouth and spat him out, much to the diver's appreciation. Isn't that insane? A real-life version of the biblical Jonah and the whale story. Number 3. Bat blood and human urine. Getting lost in the desert is the last thing anyone really wants to do. It's hot, it's full of sand, and people usually die. When Maudo Prosperi took part in the 1994 Marathon des Sables through the Sahara Desert, known as the toughest race of its kind, he got lost and he just about died. In fact, Maudo got lost in the desert for 10 days. In the middle of the race, a sandstorm kicked up. He was blinded and he couldn't breathe. And when the storm died down, he had no idea where he was. Maudo wandered for quite some time, then found an old Muslim shrine in the middle of the desert, completely abandoned and falling apart. He took shelter inside the ruin and then fed himself by grabbing a handful of bats that he found roosting within the building, cutting their heads off, mushing up their innards with his knife, and then eating them raw. He literally sucked the insides out of about 20 bats so he could survive, and then he spent the rest of his time drinking his own urine. If it hadn't been for the ruins of that Muslim shrine in the middle of the desert, Maudo would have surely perished. He eventually gathered his senses and began to walk in the direction he thought would bring him to civilization. He stumbled upon an oasis, spotted some goats, and eventually found human people who rescued him after 10 days alone in the desert. Number 2. The survivor of 2 atomic bombs. Meet the man who survived 2 atomic bombs. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in the middle of leaving Hiroshima when the bomb fell. He had been looking forward to going home to see his wife and his son when around 8 o'clock in the morning, the bomb fell on the city. At the time, he was less than 2 miles from ground zero. He survived with some pretty bad burns and his eardrums ruptured, but at least he was alive. He had to push through the ruined city and smoking carcasses just to reach the train station, which was full of burned and disoriented passengers. He then settled into the train for an overnight ride to his hometown of Nagasaki. You can probably gather the rest of the story from right here. According to History.com's amazing report about his life, Yamaguchi arrived in Nagasaki early in the morning and went to the hospital. Shortly afterwards, the second bomb was dropped. He literally fled one bomb just to get hit by the other. The atomic bomb that hit Nagasaki was more powerful than the one that hit Hiroshima. In fact, it was so strong that the shockwave blew Yamaguchi's bandages clean off his body. Miraculously, he came out the other end alive and continued living until 2010, when he passed away at the ripe old age of 93. Number 1. Struck by lightning. Getting struck by lightning is a very rare event. An even rarer event is when a man gets hit by lightning and survives. Ryan Cross became one of the luckiest people on Earth when he was struck by lightning near Idaho City on a weekend camping trip. He'd been hanging out with his friends, dirt biking and riding on their four-wheelers when a storm came out of nowhere. A bolt of lightning struck Ryan, giving him bleeding in his brain and really horrible burns down the front of his body. But somehow, he survived the incident. After he was struck, a friend managed to call OnStar and get help. He was whisked to the hospital where he eventually recovered. It's still quite a miracle. The lightning strike was so strong that it shredded the riding gear that Ryan had been wearing. How it didn't kill him is scientifically boggling, but he's definitely thankful to be alive. Who do you think out of all 10 people was the luckiest? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to come back soon.